The seat for the leadership of the 10th National Assembly is currently one of the major conversations dominating headlines. There have been talks about zoning the position to the southeast and the south-south to compensate the region. After the victory of President-elect Bola Ahmed Tinubu and his vice candidate, and now Vice President-elect Kashim Shettima, but some northern aspirants for the leadership positions in the National Assembly have kicked against the planned zoning arrangement of the All Progressives Congress, APC, to elect the presiding officers of the two chambers. This day's investigation has revealed. According to This Day, our sister media outfit, some aspirants from the Northwest, North Central, and Northeast are opposed to the zoning of the leadership positions in the National Assembly because the party did not zone its presidential ticket to any geopolitical zone. Joining us on this show this morning to discuss the current situation around zoning the key positions in the National Assembly is Senator Victor Ndoma-Egba, former leader of the 7th Senate and former chairman of the Niger Delta Development Commission, NDDC. Welcome to the morning show, Senator Ndoma-Egba, and happy Easter to you. Well, quickly, what's your take?
Happy Easter, Dr. Abati, and happy Easter, Ayo, and thank you for having me this morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much. Well, before we go into the main issue about the leadership of the 10th National Assembly, let's have your take on the electoral process 2023, the elections on February 25 and also March 18, and what you think in terms of merits and demerits.
Well, I voted in both elections. In my village, that's where I registered. And both elections went on peacefully. There were no issues. I was interviewed on both occasions as soon as I finished voting. And I gave my impression of the elections. First, from when my voter's card was collected from me for purposes of accreditation, to the accreditation process itself, using the BVN to voting, was on both occasions under 6 minutes. And it was peaceful, and I went away. I spoke with the new commander of the army, and he said security-wise, it was an anticlimax because they were on red alert the day before, but it was like the security agencies were having a Christmas party on the day of election. Now, I was only at one location, so I can only speak for that location. Now, I hear that the results were not transmitted by IREV as they ought to. That will be unfortunate. But having said so, the agents of the political parties, as soon as elections finished, knew the outcome of the results because they had records of the results. They had them on the sheets, and they had them in their phones. So I can only speak for where I voted, because that's the only place I was an eyewitness. Anywhere else will be hearsay.
All right. I hear you when you say any other place would be hearsay, but I want to assume that you watched the news and saw reports that were captured on camera and in interviews with people who were actually affected. So despite the fact that you could only speak for your polling units, there were other polling units that were reported quite widely. Did you see any of them?
I saw some. I didn't see all.
Okay.
But the thing with artificial intelligence these days, I am Catholic, and I know that my Pope is on a wheelchair. But 2-3 days ago, we saw the Pope playing basketball. So I really don't know what to believe and what not to believe. But essentially, I think the situation we find ourselves in is a crisis of expectations. I must confess that I'm an APC chieftain. I have been since 2015, when I was thrown out of the PDP. I was also secretary of the Campaign Planning Directorate of the Presidential Campaign Committee. And everything we did was to work towards winning the elections. We worked very, very hard to win the elections. Our expectations were met. Some other people's expectations were not met. So we have that crisis of expectations. On the day of the first election, all our planning in Cross River State was on the assumption that we were running against the PDP. Labour Party was not an issue in Cross River State. But surprisingly, Labour Party won, and they even won in my polling unit. We didn't make any case of that, but in subsequent elections, the same Labour Party that won in the previous election was scoring one vote in virtually every election. And you know, for us, we have always said that a political party needs a structure. Labour Party boasted that they didn't need a structure. So I think that if their expectations were not met, they have lessons to draw from this. They proceeded towards the elections as if the whole of Nigeria was one audience. And I kept saying so to their leaders. Governor Peter Obi is my friend, but I didn't see him throughout this period. But people close to him, I made this point to them, that Nigeria does not consist of one audience. Your strategy is suggesting that there is one audience, you know? So they managed to reach one audience, and they didn't reach the other audiences. So they have lessons to learn, because whether we like it or not, the performance of the Labour Party in the last election has changed the nature of politics in Nigeria, and hopefully for good.
Okay, Senator, the flip side to that narrative is that what the Labour Party has been able to prove is that you can take a political party from almost nothing to something. And Peter Obi and those who believe in him, the obedience, they moved that party. They ended up with 36 seats in the National Assembly, and also the governorship, at least of one state, Abia State in this instance. So that argument about having a structure, you can build a structure within a short while. That's what Labour Party has taught us. But let's now talk about the National Assembly. What do you think of the politics of zoning? Do you think we're likely to have a repeat of what happened in 2015 when Senator Bukola Saraki emerged at the Senate, and Honorable Yakubu Dogara emerged as Speaker of the House of Representatives against the run of play, as as we could say, for example? Or do you think that it would be fair to have in the leadership of the National Assembly Muslims, despite the fact that we already have a Muslim elected president, a vice president who is also Muslim elect? These two issues.
Well, what happened in 2015, the emergence of Dr. Bukola Saraki, did not offend the zoning arrangements that we have had, because he was from the North Central. The president, who is still president today, was from the Northwest. So his emergence just offended the expectations of the APC. And like you rightly put it, it was against the run of play. But he didn't offend the zoning arrangement, because he came from the zone that ordinarily should have produced the Senate president at that time. It is just that, let me put it another way. He came from a zone that was eligible to produce the Senate president at that time. It's just that he was not the preferred choice of his political party. So having said so, let me say that there are three perspectives to this issue. The first is the Constitution. The second is history. The third is precedent. And if you permit me, let me read directly from the Constitution because I want to quote it verbatim. If you permit me, I'll do so right away. Section 14 of the 1999 Constitution says in subsection 1, the Federal Republic of Nigeria shall be a state based on the principle of democracy and social justice. 2, it is hereby accordingly declared, blah, 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 but the crucial one is subsection 3. The composition of the government of the Federation or any of its agencies and the conduct of its affairs shall be carried out in such a manner as to reflect the federal character of Nigeria and the need to promote national unity and also to command national loyalty, thereby ensuring that there shall be no predominance of persons from a few states or from a few ethnic or other sectional groups in the government or in any of its agencies. Now, the principle enunciated in section 14.3 is an elevated principle of inclusiveness, of social justice, of equity. Now, I was in the field. Like I said, I was secretary of the Campaign Planning Directorate for the Presidential Planning Committee. I was out there in the field. And one of the major issues we had to contend with was the issue of the same-faith ticket of our presidential candidate then and the vice presidential candidate. It was a major issue for us Christians. It was a major issue for us Southerners. Now, we have just survived one anxiety. By the grace of God, we won. We have just survived one anxiety. We should not willingly or unwittingly create another anxiety. We might not survive it, it might consume us. The Constitution is very, very clear. It must be inclusive. Every section, ethnic, religious, must be accommodated in the governance of this country, in the opportunities and resources of this country. Having said so, we have a Muslim president-elect from the south, a Muslim president-elect from the northeast. I have given a little background of the Constitution. So let me go a bit into history. This current democracy, I used to refer to it as episodes because we used to expect military interventions every now and then. But I think this has come to stay. It's no longer an episode. So I will refer to it as this democracy. Started in 1999. President Olusegun Obasanjo from the southwest was first elected. The Senate presidents, and they came in very quick succession, if you recall, were all from the southeast. From Senator Evans Enwerem to Senator Chuba Okadibo, to Senator Anyim Pius Anyim, to Senator Adolphus Wabara, to Senator Ken Nnamani. It was never an issue how many of them from the southeast became Senate presidents. In fact, at a point I joked to late Senator Aton Zeribe that at the rate we were going, every senator from the southeast was going to taste the Senate presidency. But they were all from the southeast. There was national consensus on that issue. So each time any of them slipped on the legendary banana peel, they looked for a replacement from the southeast. In fact, it got to a point, because I came in the 5th Senate in 2003, where a first-time senator, against the rules of the Senate, Senator Ken Nnamani, had to assume the Senate presidency But it wasn't an issue because everybody believed that the circumstances were unusual and that it was still the turn of the Southeast. After President Olusegun Obasanjo, we had President Umaru Yar'Adua. May God bless his soul. And he was from the Northwest. Senator David Mack was Senate President from the North Central. When President Yar'Adua passed on, his Vice President, Dr. Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, from the South, continued where he stopped. Goodluck Jonathan's administration was seen as an extension of the administration of President Umaru Yar'Adua. And don't forget the constitutional crisis that we almost got into that necessitated the doctrine of necessity to enable President Goodluck Jonathan assume the mantleship of state. And because of that, because of the very peculiar situation, the country was wobbly politically. It was decided that David Mack should continue because that government was essentially an extension of Umaru Yar'Adua's presidency. So David Mack's case, especially after President Yar'Adua died, was peculiar, was unusual. After President Yar'Adua and Dr. Goodluck Jonathan, we had President Muhammadu Buhari. The Senate presidency remained in the North because what we have always had is if you have the president from the North, the vice president will be from the South, the Senate presidency will be in the North. So if you have a Southern president, you had a Southern Senate president. Now, we had president and vice versa. If you had a Northern president, you had a Northern Senate president. When President Buhari assumed office, against the run of play, to quote you, Dr. Bukola Saraki emerged as Senate president. But he was from the North Central. The North was eligible to produce a Senate president. The only zone that couldn't produce was the Northwest because that's where the president was from. But the Northeast and the North Central were eligible to produce. And then after Dr. Bukola Saraki, we have Dr. Ahmed Lawan from the Northeast. So we are not reinventing the wheel. We started with President Olusegun Obasanjo from the Southwest. We had the Southeast presidency. We have had that history. We have had that precedent. We are not reinventing the wheel. The proper thing to do is to zone it to the Southeast.
All right.
And I use this opportunity
to
just appeal to my Northern Muslim brothers who are interested in the leadership of the Senate to recuse themselves from this race in the interest of the unity of this country and in the spirit of Section 14, subsection 3 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria as amended.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking us down history lane. But I'd like to ask you, Senator Ndoma-Egba, you have spoken very clearly as to your view that the Senate presidency should be zoned, despite the fact that your party hasn't come out to the position as to whether they would zone it or not. I'd like to ask you, is there a candidate that you're backing? Because if you zone it to the South, there are a number of people who have indicated interest, a number of senators who have indicated interest in the Senate presidency. So if you're looking away from the North, who would you be backing and why?
Section 50 of the Constitution creates the office of the Senate President. And it says the senators shall elect from amongst themselves who shall be Senate President. I'm not a serving senator, so I'm not eligible to vote. But I think my duty is, having been leader of the Senate, first deputy leader and then later on leader. I was deputy leader in the 6th Senate and leader in the 7th Senate. So I was in leadership for 2 out of my 3 terms in the Senate. I know that Senator Osita Izunaso was in the House of Representatives He was also in the Senate when I was there for one term before he left to become a National Organizing Secretary of the APC. And I hear he's returning to the Senate. You also have Senator Ojus Okalu, who was also in the House of Reps at some point. He's been in the Senate. I think this is his second term. He's a principal officer. So both of them are eligible. They are ranking senators and they're eligible. I don't have any particular candidate. But I just believe that we must stick to the principle, or the principles of equity, fairness, and justice. Our brothers from the north, Muslim brothers from the north, should not take it because they can. It is not a question of might. It is a question of justice. It is a question of equity. And each and every one of them has a stake in the survival of this country. If that is the sacrifice they must make to keep this country one, it is not beyond them to make that sacrifice.
Okay, Senator, well, fine. We know where you stand now. In terms of zoning, you think that it should, the person who will lead the National Assembly should come from the South. Are you pushing the same argument for the House of Representatives also? And then, I mean, if I push further and ask you, to be a character witness, you've mentioned Senator Izunaso, you've mentioned Senator Oji Uzokalu, who said, look, it is his turn. Emilokan, after a fashion, to be Senate president. And in fact, the thing should be zoned to his family, should be zoned to his village, Igbere village. I would like you to give, some kind of character witness in terms of the capabilities of these persons as you know them. And then maybe you also include, in that regard, Senator Godswill Akpabio from your zone, South-South, who is also interested. You don't think the South-South should even be considered at all? What do you think?
Well, let me start from the last question. I had said we were not reinventing the wheel. We have been in this situation before. How did we deal with it when we were in this situation? How did we deal with it when President Olusegun Obasanjo from the Southwest was president? All the Senate presidents, many of them at that time, all came from the Southeast. Today we have a president from the Southwest. So let's go back to what we did before. As for character evidence, fortunately, Dr. Abati, we are not in court. And the political space is different from the judicial space. And I'm a politician. Both candidates are very close friends of mine. So I will excuse myself from giving any character reference on any of them.
Okay. So you think Senator Godswill Akpabio should just forget it? Shouldn't even think about it? Because history.
When we had a Southwest president, we had Senate presidents from the Southeast. There was the question you also asked about the House of Representatives. I believe that the speakership of the House of Representatives, it's my personal opinion, should go to the North, but it should go to a Northern Christian. Because you have a president and a vice president who are Muslims. So in the interest of justice, we should just leave the legislature to the Christians just to balance. Okay. For the Senate president, I am very clear in my mind that he should go to the Southeast. For the speakership, he should go to a Northern Christian.
All right. Two things, Senator Ndoma-Egba. You haven't said anything about the South-South, where you're from. You talk about the Southeast only for the Senate president. Is there a reason for that? Some factions are saying it's time for the South-South, it's time for them to emerge as Senate president. Also, I just want to confirm, you have been reported to have put your support behind Senator David Umahi, even though he's going to the House as senator for the first time. Is this accurate, or were you quoted out of context in terms of your backing or support for Senator David Umahi. In fact, the report says that you're urging legislators to back him, and you spoke glowingly and gave him a character reference in speaking at the time. Is this still your position, or are you moving away from that? And then very quickly, just to take you back, I know this might seem after the fact, but it's important to put this on record. You talk about justice in terms of, since we have a Muslim ticket for president and vice president, therefore, in the interest of justice, we should have a Northern Christian for Speaker of the House of Reps and a Christian from the Southeast, I assume, for the Senate president. Did you consider justice when you backed the Muslim ticket, or it didn't matter in that instance?
First, I don't recall mentioning Governor David Umahi's name in the last 1 year. I don't. I have not had any reason to mention his name. I have not had any cause to mention his name. Yes, he is an acquaintance. I don't know whether the relationship has developed to the level of friendship for me to be engaged in his aspirations. He comes from Ebonyi State. I come from Cross River. Our politics do not mix, apart from the fact that we are very good neighbors. So I have had no cause. I have not seen Governor Umahi in I think the last time I saw him was like 3 years ago when we met on a Lufthansa flight. I haven't seen him. I have had no cause to speak with any legislator, whether outgoing or incoming. I have no locus to dictate which way they should go. It is only the party, it's only the APC that can guide them on that. And if I have any views, I will share my views with the leadership of the APC. Or when I'm invited by Dr. Abati, who is a Calabar boy like me, I am obliged to come. You know? So I don't know where the story about Governor Umahi is coming from. I have never made any such comment. I have not had any cause to make any such comment. I have not had any cause to speak to anybody on any particular aspirant. Rather, I speak on the issues, on the principles that should govern us in arriving at that decision. Two, you asked why about the South and Senator Godswill Akpabio. I have based my arguments on history and precedent. It is not personal. Maybe the day we get a president from the Southeast, the South will produce the Senate president, maybe. But from what we have had so far, history is on the side of the Southeast. Precedent is on the side of the Southeast. Equity and fairness are on the side of the Southeast.
All right, just the last question I asked with regards to your view on supporting, because you talk about equity, fairness, justice, and I wanted to ask if that wasn't in consideration when you backed the Muslim ticket.
Yes. When I joined the APC in 2015, I had no idea who was going to be the candidate in 2023. I don't have a crystal ball. I didn't have one then. I don't have one now. And it is not one of the possessions I hope to acquire. I didn't have a crystal ball. But I have been a committed and dedicated party man. I have always been in whichever political party I find myself. I put my body and my soul into that party. We went into the primaries. Yes, people had their different tendencies. But a candidate emerged. And it was the privilege of the candidate to pick his running mate, depending on his calculations. And he picked one. Yes, I may have had my issues with that, but what could I do as a loyal and dedicated party person? What could I do in a situation where the candidate himself had the constitutional responsibility and the privilege of picking his running mate? He exercised his privilege, he exercised his discretion. That is not to say that having exercised his discretion as he was entitled to, he didn't leave us with issues. He left us with issues. And we had to contend with those issues throughout the campaigns. His calculation was, I believe, that was the safest route for him to victory. Now, having won, he has to make amends. He has to compensate. There has to be compensation. And that is the issue.
Well, Senator, two things. One, talking about crystal balls, which you just talked about. You've been quoted as saying that President-elect Bola Tinubu as president will not disappoint Nigerians. How can you be so sure that he will not disappoint Nigerians? Because Nigerians keep saying their leaders disappoint them. And then secondly, you've also been quoted as saying that the 10th National Assembly will be very interesting because in the Senate, you can't really readily have 2/3 majority. So what could be the implication of that? Or do you foresee a situation whereby some of these elected persons will just join the ruling party in search of stomach infrastructure, as it were?
Well, I think the best way to know a person is to look at his past. And if that person has been very consistent in his positions, in his achievements in the past, you can only say this is where he will go. It's like when you look at children. You can tell those who are going to go where? From their character, from their past, from how they behave. We saw the president-elect as governor of Lagos State. We saw his achievements. We saw the very inclusive politics he played, bringing people from different parts of the country to be part of his government. Some of them have since moved on to the federal level. I don't want to call names. So, like they say, Leopold doesn't change his spots. I don't see him changing now that he has bigger responsibilities. What I see is, like he performed in Lagos, he is going to rise to the demands of the responsibilities at the federal level as president. He's even going to do better. So, yes, I made the comment that the National Assembly is going to be quite interesting because what we have had in the past is two major parties, one in the opposition and one in government. And then occasionally you have some fringe parties, YPP and a few other parties, But largely the numbers were between the party in power and the major opposition. So you could deal with a clear opposition. It's not an asymmetrical situation where you have different parties and it's like a bush war. You don't know where the enemy is hiding, So what will happen? I see what will happen now being like what happened in 1979 when the then NPN had to enter into some working arrangements with other parties like the NPP. Because the Senate, the APC membership of the Senate, I don't know whether the number has changed, but the last time I checked, they had 57 senators. With 57 senators, you can get a simple majority if all of them are present and voting. But there are some constitutional issues that require 2/3 majority. And with 57, you cannot have 2/3 because 2/3 should be about 73 or 74. So you need to work out some kind of arrangement with other political parties so that you can push through major policy issues that require, say, constitutional amendment. You must have a working relationship with those people. But the trend has always been, like you say, the weaker parties, after some time, their members just move over to join the government in power. But let me assume that does not happen. We are assuming that in the next 4 years, we are going to see senators maintain the parties that sent them to the Senate. So in that situation, you need to work out some arrangement with one or two other parties so that you can pass those major policy and constitutional issues that you want to pass through the Senate.
All right, finally, sir, just to ask you with regards to Cross River State, you will be inaugurating a new governor come May 29, Prince Basi Otu, and your thoughts around the expectations. In looking back at reviewing Governor Ayade's tenure, some people have had a few criticisms around his handling of the economy. The APC is back with Prince Otu. What are your expectations from his government?
Well, first, people conveniently forget that Senator Ayade was in the PDP for 6 years. He spent only 2 years in the APC, and they want to judge him by the 2 years in APC while conveniently forgetting his 6 years in the PDP. You know, so I think if you were to judge him, you will judge him more by the 6 years in PDP and not the 2 years in APC. But having said so, Senator Bassey Otu has a lot of work to do, plenty of work. First of all, you know, for 24 years, since 1999, Cross River has been a PDP state. And the PDP lost today because of the arrogance that came with staying in power for that long. It became the personal property of an individual who decided virtually everything. And we moved over to APC and worked this hard to dismantle the PDP structure that has given us no benefit at all in the last how many years, so that we can now have an atmosphere for proper democracy. We once had that when Donald Duke was governor, for instance. People conversed, people met, people discussed, people debated. You know, but we got to a position where we had an autocracy rather than a democracy.
Well, Senator, just
first, okay. we have to go back. Yes,
please.
We have to go back to the democratic culture that we are trying to build. There are very many issues that will challenge Senator Bassey Otu. Very, very many issues. Senator Ayade was quite experimental in his approach to government. Large government, government in playing a major role in industries, in the economy. You know, there are two schools of thought. It's been a subject of major debate across the world, whether we should have big government or small government. Senator Otu will have to contend with that. Does he want big government? Does he want small government, as the rest of the world is working towards? He will have to contend with that philosophical issue. The issue of the economy. Should government be directly involved in industries? Should government be directly involved in business? That is another thing he has to contend, because that is the direction Senator Ayade took us to, of government building industries, building factories, trying to run businesses, you know. But across the globe, there are two tendencies. The very few socialist countries left believe that they should be involved in business and in industries. Many more governors believe that business should remain the business of businessmen and women. So Senator Otu will have to deal with this. He will have to deal with the mindset of Cross Riverians, the attitude. Because in the last, every government molds the people's attitude. I remember the days of Donald Duke. We suddenly became a very attractive people, you know, because of his policies. Calabar was the place to be in for the carnival. So Cross Riverians suddenly became very, very important people. You know, but today, virtually everybody, I believe that there are more people holding government appointments than those who are not holding government appointments. So that has come with its own attitude. It has come with its implications on the civil service, you know. So there are so many issues that Senator Otu will have to deal with.
Well, Senator, just before we wrap this up, just one clarification. You said the People's Democratic Party became the personal property of an individual. Who is that individual? If I may just do small akroko before we go. And how did that person turn the PDP into a personal property?
When Vice President Atiku Abubakar was in Calabar recently to campaign just before the elections, he asked a question at the stadium. Somebody showed me the video. How come Senator Ndoma-Egba left the PDP? How come Senator Basio too left the PDP? How come Senator Florence Itagiwa left the PDP? How come Florence Itagiwa left the PDP? And many other names. We were all thrown out. And Senator Lee Elimoke, who was governor after Donald Duke, said yes. In his response, he said they left, but will still win elections. Elections are won by people. They are won by people. So if you've thrown out all these people and you still expect to win an election, we needed to prove to you that the Cross River State did not belong to an individual. So it was Senator Imoke I was talking about.
Okay. He turned the party into a personal property. Okay. I'm sure Senator Lee Imoke will probably have the opportunity to defend himself. Thank you very much, Senator Ndoma.